Hello, my name is Rohit Teresa and welcome to my YouTube channel. So, in this video, we'll create simple project and understand the project hierarchy in Rails. Okay, and also we will understand the architecture, which is the MVC architecture that they follow. We'll understand that. Okay, so let's start. Uh, I'll open my terminal and to create a Rails project, there is a very simple command. But before I do that, you might have set up your local environment. Let me quickly show it to you. You should have Ruby. I'm using Ruby this version, Rails this 7.1.3.4, then jam-v this. Okay. Now let's start. So you can use command Rails new. Then after this, you have to write the project name. So I'll name it as quiz app. Okay. This is the very common command that you can use and it will create the default project. Okay. But I want to make two changes. First, because this is an introductory video series, I don't want to add test cases to it. So I'll use -t. This will remove all the test cases. Basically, it won't add any test cases related files. Okay. And by default, the database is SQLite. Okay. SQLite or SQL, something related to that. But I want to use PostgreSQL because when we deploy it on server, Postgres is the better option. Okay, so for that, to change the database, I will use -d, which stands for database default equals to PostgreSQL. Okay, enter, and it will create the entire project for us. Okay, so we'll have a look at everything. Let's see. Okay, so it has done everything. It has created the project. So I'll go into that folder. So cd quiz app. Okay, clear. Now let me open that project. So for that, I'll go to open, desktop, YouTube, code, quiz app. Okay, so let's understand all these folders and files. Okay, but before we do that, let's understand the architecture first. Okay, so this is the architecture that Rails uses, which is MVC architecture, which stands for Model View Controller. Okay, so now how does this work? Okay, so think of it like this. Browser is our Chrome, Firefox, those are called browsers, right? In this, person types a URL. As soon as someone types a URL, it will send that information to our controller. Okay, controller can be anything. It can be any type of controller. Okay, and once that gets done, it will either decide that if it has to get some data from the database or it will send it to view and show it to browser. Now let's try to understand this in real time. Okay. So browser is our, as I've said, Chrome, Firefox, that view is basically HTML, CSS, JavaScript, which is getting shown in the website. Okay. Model or database. So let's understand database first. So whenever you sign up on any website, right? Or for example, on a blogging on a blogging website, you add a blog. So that blog gets saved somewhere, right? Where does it get saved? It gets saved in our database. In our case, that database is PostgreSQL, which we used in our command, right? Now, for example, if I'm saying a user gets saved to our database. So user has name, email, password, username, a lot of different things, right? Now, all those things combined, we say that it is a user. So that user is basically a model here. Okay. Now, there can be various types of models like user model, blog model. In our case, user model, question model, answer model, quiz model, all those things will get created. Okay. So it's a way to read and write or update, interact with database. Okay. Because database is just rows and columns. Basically, it has various tables and it has rows and columns. But model is basically class. So user class we will create, uh, which will have email ID, password, all those things. But it will be easier to access things. So that's what model is. Okay. Now, controller is basically a set of files between view and model, which helps us in writing the logical parts of our code. For example, if we are getting a product, okay, there's a e-commerce website in which there's a product on the website and we are getting that product model from our database, okay, but on that product model, taxes for each country will be different, so that we might not save to the database. At least in product model we might not save it. So as soon Or if it is only for India, let's say it has a fixed tax rate of 18%. So in that case, the controller will take the price from the model and calculate the final price by adding the tax in it. Okay. So in a way, controller is making sure that our business logic can be written here. Okay. Model will work with database, view will work with the UI part, the logical part in most of the cases goes to controller. Okay. There can be two types of controller, Ruby, which is a backend controller, and JavaScript, which is a front-end controller, but still, all of them combined, we call them controller only. Okay. Let's try to understand this from the analogy of human body. It won't be the perfect analogy, but still try to understand this. Database is our brain. Okay. Now, and view is our skin, our features, our eyes, our ears. So everything which is external. Okay. Controller is basically the entire skeleton. I won't say skeleton, but maybe we can say neurons and all the important things which basically control, which basically connects with our database and control our facials, our features and everything. For example, if I want to smile, okay, so brain is creating that activity that, hey, you have to smile. But that information gets sent via controllers to my facial features and I can finally smile. So that's how, similarly, your brain can say that, hey, you have to subscribe to this channel. But finally, your hand will take that action, right? So hand will be the view in this case. And the information going from your brain to your hand is basically controller. Okay. Now subscribe to this channel, basically. Okay. So I hope you have understood some part of it. To summarize, browser, final output for the user. View, the UI elements like HTML, CSS, JavaScript that we see. Controller, business logic, brains basically. Model, basically the database. Okay. How does it work? Browser will always send information to controller so that controller can decide what it has to do, whether it has to calculate some things and then show information or directly show some UI like hello world. Okay. And based on that, it will either collect data from the database or it will directly go to view and share it. Okay. But in each and every case, browser, controller, and view are always important. Model and database can be optional depending. If it's just a front-end website, then in that case, you don't need model and database, right? So that's how it works. Now let's try to understand the project folder. So there are various folders. Along with that, there are various files. Let's quickly understand these files, but I will ignore some of these files which are really not important for beginner level. So let's not make things complicated. Rake file, basically a file which helps us in overall Rails development. Readme.md file contains basic documentation for the website when we upload it to GitHub, when we push our code to GitHub, but doesn't really add any logical database, any view related thing to our project. It is just for developers understanding. Okay. Jam file and Jamlock. So basically you might have used any other platform. For example, if I take analogy of React has a lot of libraries, right? All those libraries are added to NPM packages. Okay. Now in React, we have package.json file and package.log or package.json.log file, something related to that. Okay. Similarly, in Ruby is sort of a, I think, sort of a Perl, I don't know, Perl or sort of a stone, right? And Jam is also a stone. So they have used these terminologies. Jam basically means library only. Okay, but it's just a fancy way of saying it, but it's finally a library. Like PG is Postgres library, Rails is itself a library, Redis is a library. So all these are libraries. Now whenever we want to add or update any library, we do it in Gem file. Okay, we will do that in this project. So yeah, and when we install that finally, okay, then it creates a final summation of file which is gemfile.log, and this file actually gets used by our code. Okay. Docker, ignore that for now. Config, ignore that, not an important thing. Ruby version, we'll mention the Ruby version. Git ignores all the files of our project. I'll add one more file, .ds_store. So all the files and folders which we mentioned in this won't get uploaded to our GitHub. Similarly, Git attributes is fine. Docker, ignore all these things. We are not working with Docker right now, so it's fine. Vendor, okay. So I mentioned that we can add Ruby or Rails related libraries in gem file. Okay, so this is purely for Ruby and Rails only. For if we want to add some UI related library to JavaScript, to our front end, we can do that in vendor. Okay, so in this we keep our front end related libraries. Okay, maybe a selector down, maybe some specific thing. Okay, but it's optional. Some of these libraries, for example, Tailwind CSS, it's a front end related library, but it works with Rails also, so we'll add that in Rails. Okay, so vendor is basically for JavaScript or front-end related libraries generally. Temp is just the cache and all those things, like during development, a lot of files get generated. Temp is just that. Storage, avoid that right now, nothing is special. Public folder contains our basic details which are outside of our project. For example, if I run this project, I can run this using Rails server, or I can simply write S. That's it, Rails S, and it will start the project on this. By the way, I think I will get an error. Yes, because we haven't created the database. If you read this entire thing, what it says is, hey, you have mentioned that you have a database, but you haven't created it. So for that, you can run this command. So let's run this bin/rails db create. Let me stop. So I'll simply use Control C or Command C. Rails. You can use bin/rails or Rails. Either one is fine. But I'll use bin/rails db create. And it will create a database for us. Refresh. Okay. Rails S, refresh, and we can see the website is working. Okay, now let's go again to the code. So public basically contains all the files which are outside of our body, which are generally used. The most important thing, one is favicon here. Others are like, if you are getting 404 error, then how will that can get shown in your website? That's some basic stuff, not a big deal. Okay, as a HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you can developer, you can easily understand this. Okay, log will keep all the log during development. For example, if you see this, what was the last message in our terminal? Completed 200 OK, 10 milliseconds, 2.7. Completed 200 OK, 10 milliseconds, 2.7. So whatever comes in our development, during terminal goes here. For example, if I will press enter here, it should get added here also. Okay, that is not getting added. Okay, so it works only from the Rails side, not from our side. Okay, no issues. Okay, good to know. Lib will contain other libraries if we want to add. In this project, we won't, so don't worry about that. DB will contain database related things like our tables, our rows, our database related files. When you are creating a new project, you might have some basic details already. So that goes in database. So basically, database related thing happens here. Bin folder, I'll go to config, but bin folder. So right now, if you remember the last command that we ran, it was bin/rails. So what it means is that you are going to bin folder, and inside that you are running this Rails command, which basically ends up running all these commands. Similar to this, you have rake command, you have setup command, you have import map, you have Docker entry point. For example, I can run. Let's do setup. No, it's fine. No need to run anything else, but you can basically do something like this. Bin/rake. Okay, and it will run the rake command, if whatever it is. Right now, we don't need all these things, so it's fine. Rails server. Okay, so I hope you have understood this. Bin contains all the scripts, which in turn runs commands, which helps us in development. Okay, now config. Config is the overall application related configuration. For example, if we are in development, we might use some development related code which won't go to production. In production, it will be different. In staging, it will be different. So these are application wide things, not for a specific page or a specific thing, right? So all those things go into config. Now, along with that, you are opening different page, right? This is a page. So based on this page, what should get shown here also is part of this config, which actually happens in routes.db. We'll go in depth of it in next video, but it is an important thing. Basically, whenever you write, I mentioned that in MVC architecture, that whenever you write a URL in browser, it goes to the controller. But controller can be A controller, B controller, C controller, D controller, F. It can be hundreds of controllers. Which controller should this open? For which URL, which controller should get opened? That gets written in routes. Okay. So, and from routes, then again in controller, once we have identified the controller, then we can go to model also. Once we have identified the controller, we can go to view also, everything can work. but mapping between which URL should go to which controller happens in routes. Okay, so let's stop this. Let's go to app. Now, app has a lot of these things. Okay, let's understand each one of these. These are really important. Out of everything that we did earlier, for this entire series, DB and config, these DB, config, and gem file, these three things are important. Okay, nothing else is important. Even in config, not everything is important. Only basic things are important. Uh, Now let's go to app. Also in app, not all the things are important, but at least you should understand everything. Assets helps us in keeping all the icons, all the images, all the CSS related thing, all the music, basic things that you want to create a really good website. All those assets, all those files go into assets. Okay, channels. Okay, so uh, if you have used any chat application, you can see there are things like typing on online. Then you start, you write the message and it goes directly to the user. So all those things are not HTTP requests. It's not like you are posting data directly using HTTP request. What happens is they work using something called as WebSocket. What WebSocket does is it creates a connection between two users. Whenever you are chatting with me and I'm chatting with you, right? So there are two users, or it can be multiple, but I'm giving you a simple example. There are two users between which a connection gets created in such a way that our application is always reading content from one side and sending content to another side. Same happens from second side, always reading from content from one side and sending to other side. That is called a web socket. Okay. Now, in Rails, to create such applications, they have something called as channels. Okay, it uses WebSocket along with it. That's the base of it. But channels is a more Ruby way of writing things. WebSocket is a general terminology which across the stacks, across the websites, across the programming languages. Okay, but channels is a Rails way of doing that chat application kind of thing. Okay, controllers and this controllers will go later. Helpers. Oh, sorry, not helpers. Yeah, let's go into controllers. I've already explained you, it's the brains thing in the MVC architecture. So whenever a browser gets hit on a URL, it will go to the controller, and based on that, it will decide if it has to interact with the database, show the view, how it has to show the view, all those things gets controlled in controller. Now, when we are working with views is basically all the HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Okay, this is the code. Don't get worried about why it is HTML.erb. It's a way to write HTML, CSS, as well as Ruby code in the same file. Okay, it is really easy. It is really advantageous because you can write Ruby along with this. So you can write if, else, for loop, all those kind of things. Okay, so it makes programming easy. Okay, but the basic point here is views contain UI related part. Okay, ERB stands for embedded Ruby, which basically means HTML and Ruby combined. Okay, models I've already informed you, database related thing. Okay, now helpers. So what happens is when you are working with views, sometimes you have to write conceptual things. Okay, a bit of logic. Okay, it's not part of controller fully, but it can be a very simple logic like again, just calculating the percentage of something. Okay. Now, if it is a flat thing, it can be done directly in views, right? So you can do it in view, but what happens is when you're doing logical things in view, it makes your code a bit messy. It doesn't look that great. So how can you fix that? So for that, Rails provides something called as helpers. Okay. What it does is you can transfer that code of view to helper, and in helper, you can create a variable for it and directly use it in view. For example, if there is a complex calculation that is going on, so in view, you can create in helper, you can create a variable for that, do that entire calculation, set the view and everything in helper also, and send that information as a variable in view and directly use that. Okay. So helper is basically if you want to write some logical thing in front end, helper is there. Okay. It basically helps you in creating better views. That's it. JavaScript. So you might be aware in front end we write a lot of JavaScript, right? For example, the simplest example that I can give you is when you click on some button and drop down menu appears, it does have JavaScript up to a certain extent. So that kind of JavaScript, that kind of front end related logical code goes into JavaScript. In JavaScript also we have controllers. That's why I earlier mentioned that we have two types of controllers, JavaScript and Ruby. So this controller, first controller is for Ruby related code. The second one is for JavaScript, which is the front end related code. Okay. Don't worry about it in depth. It's completely fine, but that's the basic differentiation. Now jobs. So what happens is sometimes our website does too much of expensive task, like something which takes more than 30 seconds. Okay. For example, you are downloading your bank statement. Now you will have to read the database across millions and millions of records, fetch all those details, and create a PDF file. All those things do take time, do take processing. It is not something that can be done in 30 seconds. Okay. Now, during that entire process, your website gets stuck if you are doing it simple coding. Okay. Now, what happens is our website works on a specific process, a specific thread. So what you do is you transfer all those heavy tasks to a separate thread, separate process. Okay. And once it gets completed, it sends back information back to your front end. Okay. So what happens is, for example, if there is a download button in my website, which takes like 5 minutes to process things, I can click on download. Now, if I have written bad code, I will have to wait for those 5 minutes. I cannot use the website. It will get stuck. It will get messy, all those things. But if I have written that inside a job, which is a separate process, separate thread, completely separate from main thread on which our website works, then what will happen is as soon as I click on download, it will mention me, hey, we have started the job. It will take 4 to 5 minutes. I can still use my website, interact with everything. And when the process gets finished, it will send that information back to our front end that, hey, look, things are done now. Okay. So that way user has a better experience. They can still interact with the website. At the same time, jobs will also work better. Okay. So jobs is basically background jobs. Okay. Things which work in background such that the front end doesn't get stuck. Okay. And one more thing, mailers. So mailers is basically email related thing. Okay. For example, if you sign up on any website, you'll get an email for confirmation, email confirmation. Once you have, if you have clicked on forgot password, you'll get a password email. So all those email, or if you are sending a notification related email, if you are welcoming someone, you will send an email. So all those emails which you receive, that email can be part of mailers. So it has a UI, whom to send to. Whenever you are receiving an email, it has a person who has sent that email, person who is receiving that email, subject, and the body. It can be an HTML, CSS, or it can be a text, but it is finally a body, right? So all those things get controlled via mailers. Okay. Our website, when it sends an email, we can control it using mailers. That's it. So I've gone in real depth of understanding this project structure. If you have any doubt, feel free to ask. I'm ready to explain in more detail, but I'll end this video here only so that in next video, we can start implementing some basic things, not the UI related thing, but interacting with the homepage basically. Okay. I hope you have understood this MVC architecture as well as this, because it's really important. If you have any doubt, feel free to mention it. If you like this much depth of the video, do comment, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Thank you. Bye-bye.